Hey, and what is up, everybody? Let me fix this. Welcome to Where All the Ladies At. This is a myth edition, and I think that's a little crooked. There we go. Okay. And hey, I'm your host. I'm Kim. I am a history nerd, a lover of mythology, a archaeology groupie, everything you can think of. I'm also a writer on the side, or actually my main purpose is writing, but this is kind of a side thing, although I'd love this to be a permanent, like, main gig. That would be amazing. As you've noticed, I hyped up Pride Month and then nothing happened. Well, it's because I was poor time management. That's really what happened. And so I'm an English teacher as well, so it's the end of the year. I didn't account for how much work I was going to have, and so I got a little behind. So you are going to get every single episode that I plan to have for Pride Month, because I want to celebrate Pride. It just may be in a 2-week increment, or maybe the last week. We're going to see. I'm recording everything now, getting everything edited. I promise they'll get you out. Sorry, my cat is doing something crazy. Hold on. Hey, stop. All right. So you will get everything, because I want to celebrate Pride. It is a very important month to me. Why? A little backstory, a little history, shall we say. I came out very late in life, and so I really haven't. I've always been an ally, and then I realized that I wasn't necessarily an ally. I was part of the community, and so now this is, I think, my 7th Pride, I think. So pretty cool. 7th, 8th Pride, give or take. And so it's pretty cool. So I want to celebrate it. And as I said in my previous one, for mythology, that means we are celebrating rainbow goddesses, and for the history, we are celebrating iconic LGBTQIA, sometimes allegedly, women in history. So I think it's going to be pretty amazing. I promise you're going to get that all. Speaking of this podcast, before we jump into the topic of the day, which is Manzat, who is a Mesopotamian goddess of the rainbow, I want to make an announcement. So I'm trying to launch a business and do a bunch of other stuff, so I am going to be pulling back a little bit. You are still going to get 2 podcasts a month, one for mythology and one for history, and you can still find a whole bunch of cool stuff over on my Medium, but I need to have a little more time on things, on starting the business and getting that prepped and running. Now, with that being said, I'm also going to be launching a newsletter. So, I think you're going to be able to sign up for that newsletter over on Patreon, and that's where you're going to find it. And buy me a coffee, depending on whichever one you want to use. And then I am working on launching a website, so that should happen sometime in the summer, and you'd be able to find it there as well. With this newsletter, you're going to get more information on certain people, and you'll get some other content as well. And then that's going to be how I'm going to supplement, because remember, I've been doing basically 8 episodes a month, and I'm going down to 2. So I'm going to use the newsletter to help supplement, and because I'm a writer, it takes less time for me to do that. And so I hope that you guys will head over there and sign up for the newsletter. Also, I will be posting more on social media, so you'll be able to get great content there as well. That's part of the reason why I'm pulling away from doing 8 episodes a month, is because I want to be able to focus on other avenues so we can build this community more. Hold on just 1 second. My cat is once again doing something crazy. Hey, I will shut that window. You better behave yourself. She's being sassy pants today. I don't know. Maybe it's something to do with what's happening in the stars. I don't know. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that's kind of what's going to happen forward. That is going to start in July. And so, yeah, I really want to give more time to this, but I have so many other things on my plate that I just want to make sure that I allot time for everything, because I want to do everything to its fullest. Also, by limiting the episode count, I can maybe make these more for YouTube, more visually appealing, and also maybe do a little bit more deep dive and do a little bit maybe longer episodes on the topics that I do. So there's that. Along with that, we can do some housekeeping. As I always do, you can definitely reach out to me on social media. I have TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, all three of those. If you would like to rock it old school, I have an email. It's all going to be in the description box. If you want to support the podcast, you can do that by liking, sharing, following, subscribing, doing all that good stuff. Everything you do to engage with this makes it for a wider community. And if we have a bigger community, I will be able to give more time to this podcast, which I really would love to do because it is like my baby. If you want to support me financially, you can do that too. You can over to Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. Coming up soon, I just am wrapping up editing something very special, and I'm not even going to make it a surprise. I'm just finishing up my first short ebook on one of the amazing ladies in history, and that will be available for purchase over there, as well as a couple other places. And when I actually publish it, I will let you know. It should be up in the next month at some point, so you could go and purchase that book. There will be more to come. I'm going to start releasing some short ebooks and on myth as well as history over there for you guys to get your history fix in a little bit more. What else? Or if you just want to like donate because you think what I do is cool, that's awesome as well. I have a Buy Me a Coffee, as I said, and a Patreon, so you can choose which one you want. If you want information on this and so much more, of course, check out my Medium publication. Because once again, remember, I am a writer, so my Medium publication, which has been kind of dormant, once again, because of everything. But with the trimming down of podcasts, it's taking all that editing time and everything will give me more time to do those things. So all these places are going to start having more content. Just be a little less here for right now. If you are into astrology, tarot, spiritual wellness, holistic healing, all that kind of stuff, I also have another podcast, and it's called Our Mystic Road Trip. And so if you're into that, you should probably check that out. And you're listening to or watching a mythology podcast, so maybe you are kind of into that stuff. Check it out. It's really cool. I talk about all kinds of really awesome things. And I think that's it for the shameless plugging and housekeeping. So now we can jump into the topic of the day, which is Manzat, who is the Mesopotamian goddess of rainbows. I think the big thing is the reason I chose rainbow goddesses obviously is because if we're celebrating Pride Month, the rainbow is a huge symbol of the LGBTQIA community. Now, what I would say is before we jump into the goddess, I'd really like to talk about Pride Month, right? I really want to give some inclination into what it is. Because, you can be online and you can see people saying, oh, we don't understand why they need a month. But here's the thing, when you're a marginalized group, it's nice to have some acceptance, right? So Pride Month is a celebration to remember the LGBTQIA communities and allies and just celebrate them, right? It's talking about honoring the rights and recognition and the struggles that were endured and the ongoing fight that is still prevalent across the globe, right? There's been a lot of strides, but not nearly enough. And pride comes from an amazing, here's the thing. Pride is a protest, right? In some ways. It was birthed at a riot in 1969, the Stonewall riot, right? So I just want to make sure I get all the dates right, guys. So I do have notes just in case you want to know. Here's the thing. Back in that day, it was illegal, right? It was illegal to be gay. So police would raid queer bars and they were brutal, and they happened all the time. And one day the community had enough, and some beautiful transgender black and brown women stood up and said, hey, that's not cool, we're going to do it, right? And that was Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. And I actually did a podcast on Silvera last year. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely go out and check it out, because she is absolutely stunning, right? And because of this incident, it shone a light on the the movement and what was happening. And this is what started the whole movement. Well, I mean, it was there, but this is like what really gave it a big catalyst, right? So, and it also sparked the annual celebration, right? And annual activism, right? And more activism, and brought more people out, right? As we're talking about rainbow goddesses, right? So we have to talk about the pride flag as well, and that was created in 1978 by Gilbert Baker. It was really designed to reflect kind of the diversity of the people within the community, because we're not just all one thing, right? There's so many colors. It's a spectrum, like the rainbow, right? But each color was meant to kind of represent a certain thing, so red was life, orange was healing, yellow was sunlight, purple was spirit, blue was harmony, and then green was like nature, right? So it was kind of meant to show that everything worked together, right? And of course, eventually there was some evolution, right? They added black and brown stripes to represent people of color, pink, blue, and white for transgender communities, and all of these things. But the rainbow is a symbol that kind of transcends parties and parades. It's just that visual representation of unity and pride, right? And here's the thing. Pride is not just about symbols, though, right? We can have all these symbols, and that's amazing. Every group has their flag. Everybody, it's a form of representation, right? But it's also an affirmation of the ability to allow people to express themselves, their sexuality, their gender, which we'll talk about in a minute, in their own ways, and the way that feels true and authentic to them. And that is so important, right? Authenticity, whether that's in the community or not, is valuable. You should be able to represent yourself the way that you feel is right, the one that feels comfortable to you, right? And so here's the thing, that ideology is kind of where sociology and philosophy come together. And the best one is and I did a one on her too, check it out, Simone de Beauvoir. She really talked a lot about the idea of gender as a social construct. And I really think if you're interested in her, go back. I did a podcast on her, and she is absolutely amazing, right? And the reason that I bring her up is because one of the most famous quotes from her is like, one is not born, but rather becomes a woman, right? And this talks about how gender is not really innate or biologically a biological destiny, right? It's a set of roles and behaviors and expectations that our society teaches us, our culture teaches us, right? And if you look at it that way, there is there is a couple of different things you have to look at, right? I think there's biological sex, and then you have to open the door to understand others, right? There is a plethora of different identities that need to be understood and accepted, right? And I think, like, I know this is not really historical. Well, it is kind of historical, to be truthful. If we're going to talk about this, we need to talk about sexuality is who you're attracted to, whether that's emotional, romantic, physical. Gender is your internal sense of self and how you express that identity, right? They are related, but very distinct parts of your identity, right? And that every little piece of you deserves to be respected and recognized, right? So, I think the importance, and the reason I'm celebrating Pride, and the reason I celebrate diversity, and the reason I celebrate all these months to put a highlight on these marginalized and often discriminated against groups is because their stories deserve to be heard, right? It's about affirmation and not just tolerance, right? Not, you want to move from I accept you to I celebrate you. And I think everybody wants that in life, right? Affirming diversity in sexuality and gender and race and all these aspects of identity makes a whole community and a society, and it makes it brighter and it makes it stronger. And there's a full spectrum of human identity that, and by embracing it, you can enrich your culture, you can enrich creativity, you can enrich the connection. And that's really what I want to do here. So hopefully that little diatribe is not too crazy for you. With that said, that's kind of a little bit about pride, and now we're going to jump in, right? Everything else is going to be all about history, right? We are covering Manzat, the Mesopotamian goddess of the rainbow. And sorry about that. That's my neighbor's dog. I'm annoyed. All right. So we have to look at the place where people come from, right? Where the goddess or the person comes from to understand the idea of why they were who they were and why they did what they did, right? So Mesopotamia literally translates to the land between two rivers, okay? It was kind of this fertile cradle nestled between the Tigris and the Euphrates. This would be modern-day Iraq, Iran, Syria, and a little bit of Turkey. And this was the place where humanity's first major leap took place, right? This is where cities began to be formed, right? When we talk about Mesopotamia, it wasn't really a unified empire. It was more like a bunch of little city-states that formed, like kind of like the United States, right? So you have the United States, and then you have like states within it. And that's kind of what Mesopotamia was, right? You had things like Uruk and Babylon and Nippur and Dur and a bunch more, right? Every state was pretty independent, pretty adamant about being independent, in fact. They had their own rulers, their own gods, their own customs. Occasionally, things would cross over, right? But every city claimed a patron deity, right? These deities were kind of like the divine landlords, and they watched over the people and influenced fate and all that kind of stuff, right? The gods in this time were real forces of nature and society, right? If there was floods, that meant they were mad. If there was a good harvest, that means thumbs up, you did a good job, and they love you, right? When we look at Manzat, who is the goddess we're looking at today, she was connected directly to Dur, which was a city kind of overlooked because there was Ur, who was like the big guy, right, and Akkad, which was like the other big one. But because of that, I think like the inclusion of her as like the deity is kind of like pretty religious, yeah, pretty good, At this time in history, goddesses. Oh, I'm gonna get a drink of my tea. Oh yeah. Religion was kind of the operating system, not only of just religion, but just everything, right? No decision was made without interpreting what was going to be coming from the divine powers, right? Because of this, Manzat, or any other god or goddess, really played a big role. She wasn't, it's interesting because when we get into her, she wasn't like this like big storm god. She wasn't a passionate love goddess. She was just kind of this like goddess of harmony restored, right? Hope stretching across the sky, right, after turmoil, because that's where rainbow shows up, right? She was definitely less prominent than things like Inanna or Enlil. I always pronounce that wrong. Oh my god, right? But she came after storms, and that made her a very powerful reminder, right? And her rainbow was kind of like, the symbol that kind of did that, right? So that's kind of what was going on in that region. Now let's talk about women. Now here's the thing. The more I do this, the more you guys are going to be like, oh, we know what it's going to say about women. And we're partially right, for sure. But, I want to make sure everybody understands. So women in this group, in ancient Mesopotamia, were definitely not background characters. They did play some complex and dynamic roles, for sure. especially when it came to like upper class and really in spirituality, right? They could own property, they could run businesses, they could become priestesses, scribes, and even physicians, right? They weren't universally equal to men, right? There's no way at that time people were going to look at women as being equal, but they had a lot of influence, right? Even some legal texts that have been found, like, showed that they protected women's rights in matters of like inheritance and marriage, right? The divine feminine in myth was very prevalent. You know, you have Manzat, which is who we're going to talk about. But the reverence of these goddesses kind of shows that Mesopotamian culture, in a nutshell, did acknowledge that women had a divine power, right? They were there to help maintain the harmony of the universe. When it came to religion, you know, women often served as priestesses. It was one of the places where they had the most pull and sway, right? They could act as intermediaries, right? They performed rituals and maintained temples and all that kind of stuff. And in a lot of the texts, you'll see that goddesses really showed, like, they were powerful and wise, and they protected their people, and that's pretty awesome, right? When it came to like women and queens, there was a lot of that happening too, and this is where like it starts to show that the focus of women in this culture was pretty awesome, right? There were female figures like Inanna or Ishtar, depending on where you are, right? And there was also mortals like Enheduanna. By the way, I did a podcast on her as well. Go back and check that out. I don't remember which episode it was, but check out the catalog. Enheduanna. She was like a high priestess, and she was really the earliest known author, which is pretty awesome since I'm a writer. Right? And the focal point of these and the existence of these women really show that, you know, that there was a capacity for cultural and spiritual leadership from women in this society. Now we know a little bit about women, right? Obviously, still there was a lot of things that were not cool for women, right? I by no means glorifying this era, but I think sometimes when we look back at these eras with women, we tend to forget that a lot of cultures actually revered them and really actually respected them, which is awesome. And maybe a little alien to people today, which is sad because we should be further along than that, right? Right? All right, so let's look. Let's start talking about Manzat. So, Manzat is also known in Sumeria as Tirana, which is like the bow of heaven. And I think we have to look at her as more than just like a fleeting rainbow in the sky, right? She was a diplomat. She was a divine omen. Sometimes she was peacekeeper, right? When we look at her name, it appears in Akkadian and Elamitite texts. I have to check to make sure I say that right. And because it shows that it was in two texts, this kind of shows that she was important in Mesopotamia, but also had bled out into places like Elam, and maybe that was because of regional influence and everything, right? She is often linked to Ishtarin, which is she was kind of the god. He was a god of the city of Dur, and even sometimes Simut, which is an Elamite tradition. And this shows a divine partnership, right? Which is kind of common in a lot of mythology where you have that divine relationship. You know, she wasn't someone who like demanded worship and through like use of like passionate rituals or thunder and lightning or any of that stuff. She was kind of more of a quiet, more graceful goddess, almost ephemeral. That word too. My words. Because she appeared after the storm, like it was like peace and harmony was being restored, right? I mentioned that earlier, and that was the rainbow in an agrarian society that is dependent on sun and rain, right? Because at this time that was what's happening. The rainbow really symbolized hope and prosperity, right? So she was a goddess that really embodied the promise of like life would continue, crops would grow, right? and you know, at least for a little while, because there's always ups and downs, right? She was more than that pretty bow in the sky. She was a goddess of hope, cosmic balance, right? And really showing the connection between heaven and earth, right? Symbolically, I would say, if we really look at her, you know, it's kind of fleeting, right? Because the rainbow comes and goes so quickly, it's not surprising. You know, in Mesopotamia, it was looked at, the rainbow. Hold on a second, my cat is doing something crazy again. No. Sorry guys, she's being sassy pants here. You know, it was a comic sign. It was a bridge between worlds, right? A divine message that was received. There's a lot of religious context to the rainbow. So the biggest one, maybe like obvious, right, is the connection between heaven and earth, right? You know, storm and calm, warring factions, peace between them. You know, the rainbow was really looked at as a sign of peace, right? And because she was so my words associated so much with Dur, you know, I think that it was looked at as a pretty prosperous city, would be my guess, right? You know, I think we also look at it's a sign of flourishing, as I said, but also I think we have to look at it's kind of like she, as the rainbow, was kind of like a guardian of transitions, right? Chaos to order and that kind of thing. Rainbows were kind of looked at as thresholds and kind of like this liminal space where the divine could easily touch the mortal, and it kind of reminded people of the interconnectedness of the world, right? Archaeologically, which is, by the way, one of my favorite sections of this podcast, you know, she didn't have sprawling temples or epics like some of the others. You know, you have Inanna and Marduk, right? So archaeological evidence is kind of limited, but it does place her within the spiritual landscape of Mesopotamia and a little bit beyond. So we're going to look at a couple of those. So the first thing is Manzat's name appears in a lot of several cuneiform inscriptions, especially in Dena and Der. Now, I don't know if I pronounced it Dehe now. I don't know. The inscriptions list her alongside other deities, and that may show that she was kind of looked at as super important, right? And her presence in text like really recognizes that. Now, archaeological digs in Mesopotamia have uncovered remains of temples and shrines dedicated to a lot of different deities, and there's no temple specifically for her. So it's kind of accepted and thought that maybe her worship was likely more integrated into the pantheon of Dur and nearby cities. And so she kind of shared the worship space with others. And maybe that's kind of common, right? So you may have a main god or goddess, and then there was like side little goddesses and things that would be worshipped there. Direct images of her definitely are rare and difficult to distinguish, obviously, because there's not a lot. But there are rainbow motifs and symbols that appear in Mesopotamian art, and that's sometimes linked to like divine messages and celestial phenomena. I would say evidence also kind of suggests worship extended to Elam, as I said at the beginning, and she may have been paired there with the god Sumut, and this kind of shows her significance of cross-cultural borders, right? She expands out across that everything. So if we look at her role in the mythos, it's pretty obvious, right? We've talked about it. You know, unlike others who had poems and love affairs and trips to the underworld like Inanna, she's kind of more of like a cameo artist, right? She just jumps in, says, hey, you know, shows up with some omens and texts and says, what up, here we go. And so that's kind of her thing. She's not, maybe, this is horrible to say, but maybe she's like not main character energy, but she's important character energy, right? She was a part of the celestial infrastructure for sure. signs and thresholds. You know, she's kind of like the messenger god, right? Her rainbow, even though it was beautiful and kind of wasn't really passive, it was a deliberate signal, right? Kind of saying, hey, you know what, we're all cool now, right? Definitely a patroness of the in-between, right? So this is, and the liminal spaces, the in-between spaces, right, are where you find like omens and divine messages and sacred timing and all that kind of stuff. She did have some mythical partnerships, right? So she was often looked at as a consort of Ishtar, and he was the god of justice and and this may show that maybe rainbow and law, beauty and fairness, kind of all goes together, right? She was also messenger, mediator, right? So there's a lot of aggressive movers and dramatic personalities in the Mesopotamian gods, and so she was kind of like this like chill vibe, right? She was like she didn't escalate. She's kind of person who walked in the room and said, "Hey guys, we need to chill. Let's breathe." Maybe did some breathing exercise, right? And she was there to help in the chaos, and that was kind of her role in everything, right? And because of that, I think that's why she probably has a lasting influence on the Mesopotamian, you know, gods and goddesses. She's been around for a while, so a lot of people feel like she's probably part of the older stratum of deities, and because also she's attached to an elemental piece, so that also most of the time means that they're an older god. And so that's kind of Manzat in a nutshell. Now we're going to get to my favorite part, and I will preface this by saying not a lot of mythology to go here. So I just took some of the things and took my experience and my imagination and created a myth. Maybe not created it, but expanded it out, right? And we're going to talk about its story time. So as usual, guys, grab your beverage of choice, whether that be a cocktail or a cocoa, and let's settle down with our blankie and let's tell the tale of Manzat, the bow of heaven. In the first days, when the rivers still whispered the names of gods and the clay mankind had not yet cooled, the sky and the earth were one. All was mist and thunder, silence and storm. No boundary existed between divine and mortal, nor between light and shadow. The gods moved through the fog like thought through a dream, seeking order from the chaos. Then came the great council, when Anu, Enlil, and Enki gathered upon the high mountain of decision. It was there the gods divided the world like a pomegranate, heavens to the sky gods, earth to the lords of soil and stone, and the deep to those who watched from the shadow. Among the gathered deities stood Manzat, the youngest of the skyborn, her form shimmering with hues no human had yet seen. She wore no armor, and she bore no sword. Her voice was soft as morning rain, yet the gods stilled when she spoke. I asked not for a throne, nor for temples carved in gold, said Manzat, but let me stand between storm and stillness, between wrath and peace. Let me be the sign that the heavens have not forsaken the earth. The gods, weary of thunder and endless flood, saw wisdom in her plea, and so Enlil, lord of wind and decree, raised his staff and named her Torana, or Manzat, the bow of heaven. In that moment, the rainbow was born. When the storm raged and the rivers foamed with fury, Manzat soared. From the fingertips of the storm god to the embrace of the earth mother, she arched a luminous bridge between the divine and the dustborn. Her arrival always followed the weeping of the sky, a sign that peace had brokered among the gods and that the world could exhale once more. Farmers would bow when they saw her, fishermen would whisper prayers, mothers would point to the sky and tell their children, "Look, Manzat walks again." In the city of Dur, it was said she chose Ishtaran, the god of justice, as her consort, not for his power, but for his fairness. Together they governed the sacred balance, law and mercy, judgment and forgiveness. Across the Zagros mountains, in the lands of Elam, another tale told of her union with Simut, the god of war and weather, suggesting that even the storm's heart could be calmed by her touch. Though she bore no spear, Manzat was called upon in treaties between kings, invoked in oaths of peace. Her image was drawn beside those of mighty gods on temple walls, not as a warrior, but as a promise, a quiet vow from the heavens. This storm will end, harmony will return. Thus it is said, when you see the rainbow, you see Manzat stretching her arms between heaven and earth, reminding the gods of their duties and the mortals of their worth. Her bow does not strike, but it binds, not in war, but in wonder. And she shall continue to appear whenever peace is needed, whenever the storm breaks, and whenever hope is brave enough to shine through the clouds. And I think that's a very important message in this day and age. So that's it for the story time. I hope you enjoyed. That's it for Manzat. She really was that bridge between heaven and earth. And she really reminds us that beauty and connection and the promise that follows every storm is that of hope. Her legacy is subtle, but it reaches across time, and it really shows and invites us to find harmony in diversity and hope and renewal. And I think that's it for this episode, guys. I hope you enjoyed. As always, if you want to reach out to me, you can do that through my social media. If you want to support the podcast, please do that. Like, comment, share, follow, all that kind of stuff. If you want to do financially, you can do that through my Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. Want information on this goddess and so much more, check out Medium Publication. And if you're into spiritual wellness, tarot, astrology, mystical, magical kind of things, check out my other podcast called Our Mystic Road Trip. Once again, guys, I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, guys, stay curious, stay blessed, and stay safe.